Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American presidents, U.S. history, international law, human rights, and everything in between. Today's one of those days in which I guess I'll be discussing everything in between. Recently, I've been interested, and I did an earlier video about the fraudster in the CIA. I don't know if to call him a fraudster, what to call him, but the CIA senior executive member of the senior executive service. Again, the senior executive service, those are the highest people. They're mapped to general. They're the highest civilians in the U.S. Federal civil service and the U.S. federal government, the civil service. So this guy, David J. Rush, of course, he had been passing off false credentials in the CIA for the past 20 years. He had a top secret TSSCI. I have a top secret TSSCI. I know those things are very rigorous. They basically check everything inside out. The U.S. government, if they want to know what time you go to sleep, what time you wake up, all of that, they will get that information. So it's astonishing that this guy, he not only went into the CIA, but he rose to be one of the heads of the most important directorate in the CIA, the Directorate of Science and Technology. It's unbelievable. Of course, all on falsified credentials. Everything was fake, right? No bachelor's degree, which he claimed to have. No masters, no uh, naval postgraduate masters or certifications, pilot license, all of that was just false. Of course, what a lot of people are also interested in. I mean, being in the CIA, it's easy for him to get, this other stuff that he got. Because the CIA, they do covert stuff, right? So you don't know what it is they're doing. But it was the current CIA director, the director of the CIA, who Mr. Ratcliffe, who kind of like tipped off the FBI, had the FBI, execute a he executed a search warrant on his home in Ashburn, Virginia, on May 18, 2026, where they found 303 1 kilogram gold bars valued at over $40 million, and also $2 million in cash, and 35 luxury wristwatches, mostly Rolexes, right, all in his home. Um, and interestingly, he'd been pilfering money from the Navy for the so he hoodwinked not just the CIA but the Navy as well. He hoodwinked too. So I guess that's one way to do it. The Navy, yes, I've worked for the Navy, and this is something that I understand how that was done, because the human resources in the Department of the Navy is fantastically incompetent, not just incompetent, but they're crooked, right? They falsify records. I had reported people there, and they were the ones who retaliated and orchestrated a swatting. Well, that's part of what I've been going through. So hopefully, my God is good, but my God is where we're going to, that's one reason they're probably going to look and overhaul. What's interesting is that though a lot of this will be covered up tomorrow. This guy is scheduled to be arraigned. That's uh, David J. Rush, that's his name. He's scheduled to be arraigned at the U.S. District Court of Eastern District of Virginia, the Alexandria Courthouse. Interestingly, I once lived in Alexandria, Virginia. Nice area. Um, yeah, it's a long time ago, but it's kind of interesting that this. So tomorrow, he's going to be arraigned. There are probably going to be more charges. Yeah. But right now, he's currently charged with, is it 18 USC, uh, sort of minor stuff. 18 USC um, section 1001. That's falsification of government records, right? For his false credentials. So they've given him light stuff. So they're going to come down with heavy stuff, right? There's probably going to be what's called a superseding indictment, where they're going to now load on him, because they now probably were checking deeper stuff on him. Um, and they also charged him with 18 USC section 641. That's conversion, theft of government property. Um, it's interesting. They charge him with Espionage Act. Is he a mole? Is he a foreign spy? No, I'll do another video discussing that. He'd be the, he snuck into something well. He'd be the worst spy, worst mole, because moles, they want to steal information, right? A foreign spy, a sleeper agent wants to steal information for the enemy, right? They're not trying to steal money. They give them money. It's kind of funny, unless maybe they wanted to embarrass the U.S. government. I don't know, just to embarrass the CIA, to say, hey, you see how easy it is to get in. Look, the thing is, there are probably people inside there who helped him do it. He's not an isolated case, right? He didn't do it alone. He could not have done it alone. It's impossible, right? Because he went through too many things, too many layers for 20 years. He just escaped through too many things. So there's something going on in there, and they're going to flush them out. Um, but of course, it's going to be covered up, right? But it's interesting that I can imagine the movie that's going to be made from this, because I remember the Catch Me If You Can, right? This definitely tops Catch Me If You Can, right? The guy who became later a consultant for the FBI. If you've seen the movie Catch Me If You Can, based on a true story, well, was it Abernathy? That's his name. The kid who got it became a doctor, duped, became a pilot, just con artist, became a con artist, and he would just falsify credentials and all of that stuff. You should watch the movie Catch Me If You Can. Of course, they say it's a bit exaggerated, right? They say he embellished a lot of details and things, but this guy made it. He was a con artist, and he got into huge corporations, and became a pilot, doctor, lawyer, falsified you know, uh, his credentials and people like that. But he got caught. This guy is bigger than all of that. He's bigger than any. This guy is an artist. I don't know how he did. Well, the thing is, like I said, there's a network in there that's because it's impossible to get into the CIA, the U.S. government, with you know, you know, um, without the inside. There's an inside racket that did it, that allowed that to happen, right? And so we're probably going to get an embellished story, right? A covered, it's going to be glossed over, seriously glossed over. It's going to be a scripted narrative of what went on and how he did it alone. I can imagine, Hollywood is already looking for writers to write the script, and that's actually what I want to discuss today. I want to discuss the you know famous writers who were actually spies, who had been spies. Very famous writers. Of course, everybody knows of Ian Fleming, the Ian Fleming from the aristocratic British aristocratic family who gave us James Bond. He was a former British naval intelligence officer, had been a commander, and so yeah, so we know of him. Interestingly, some of the um, some of the people who played Bond had actually worked in the British Navy, like Roger Moore. So it was easy for them to model, to play Bond, to play Commander, and all that stuff. There was a time Roger Moore was my favorite Bond actor, and then later on, as I grew older, I appreciated Sean Connery. I mean, both of them are still my favorite. Daniel Craig did a good job, but somebody that I came to later appreciate more recently, that I realized would have been good. He only did one Bond movie, that's On Her Majesty's Secret Service. That's George Lazenby. Is he Lazenby, Lazenby? I don't know how to pronounce his name. But he would have done a fantastic job. And he was only 29, still the youngest to play Bond. But he turned it down. He turned the $1 million contract to do more. And, hey, probably, I know he's been kicking himself ever since. Um, because his career just petered out, right? He had no career basically after that. Um, but other famous writers who'd been spies, Friedrich Forsyth, right? I read Friedrich Forsyth when I was a kid. I liked him. The Negotiator. If anybody remembers the Odessa File, there's a movie of the Odessa File, and what else? He's very the Day of the Jackal, right? Everybody knows that, the Day of the Jackal. So he had, he was a secret spy. So he was a journalist. He was a British, foreign correspondent, and he was recruited by the MI6, right? During the Nigerian Biafra War. So he wrote a book called Emeka. I read that book. It's about the leader of the Biafran army, the Biafran Republic or whatever it was, during the Nigerian Civil War when they wanted to secede. That's Emeka Odumegu Ojukwu. Emeka Ojukwu went to Oxford. He graduated from Oxford. I don't know if Forsyth had gone to Oxford as well, but he went to write his biography, and that was when the British intelligence MI6 approached him about gathering intelligence on behalf of the British government. That's Frederick Forsyth. So you could see in his writings, you know the the spycraft that they had, right? They were able to translate it to write, great novels, uh, very vivid storytelling. Um, Many other people. There's a guy called W. Somerset Maugham. If anybody knows W. Somerset Maugham, interestingly, he was stationed in Sierra Leone. He and his sister were spies for a British intelligence MI6. They were stationed in Sierra Leone, right in West Africa. He and his sister, and of course he was really a double guy because he was really an undercover guy in the closet. He led a double life. He had a wife and had kids, but he was a homosexual, right? He was straight up a homosexual. He was gay. um, and he became a physician, very brilliant man. So yeah, he was a spy, and he'd been gathering intelligence, because he traveled a lot in Switzerland, and also gathered information for the British in Russia. And who else? Who else? Everybody knows of the famous John Le Carre. John Le Carre had actually started in MI5, and then he moved to MI6. MI5, by the way, Americans, we like to learn by comparing. We like to know what we want to understand something by an equivalent that we have in America. So MI5, think of the FBI. MI6, think of the CIA. So he started in MI5 and moved to MI6. So that's like saying, okay, he worked in the FBI and then moved to the CIA. So that was John Le Carre. Wrote very famous spy and novelist. Interestingly, his father had been a con artist, and he said, I watched an interview of his in which he was saying that the fact that his dad was a con artist, and by the way, John Le Carre was not his real name. I think his real name was David Cornwell or something. But he said watching his dad as a con artist sort of helped him hone skills that helped him as a spy. And yeah, well, who else's dad was a con artist? John D. Rockefeller. People don't talk about that. His father was a snake oil salesman. Was a con artist. That's John D. Rockefeller, who became the first billionaire, world's self-made billionaire, and he was richest man in the world, right? John D. Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil, and it was against him that the President Benjamin Franklin. I think it was during his era that he uh, passed the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, right? To break up monopolies, right? Because the United States government decided they didn't want any company, any conglomerate to be stronger than the U.S. government, right? His wealth was actually a portion of the United States government. I think roughly 1.5%, so about 2% of the U.S. Gross domestic product. Um, Back to the spies who were novelists. There was, of course, one of my favorite authors, Roald Dahl, right? Roald Dahl, when I was a kid, I used to watch his Tales from the Unexpected. He had this haunting, like this way of speaking, right? So Tales of the Unexpected. Of course, he's very famous for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I've read, was it my uncle Arthur or something like that. He's written a lot of interesting novels. But it's interesting that he'd been a pilot, so he's very tall. I mean, he's late, of course. He was very tall, and he was a friend of Ian Fleming, by the way. He was a friend of Ian Fleming, and he wrote the script. That's Roald Dahl. He wrote the script for "You Only Live Twice," I think, which was the worst James Bond movie. Well, I mean, of the great Bonds, because I don't want to say Bonds that were not my favorite. I've not even really watched their movies. I've never been able to sit through. But of Sean Connery's movies, I think that was his worst. You Only Live Twice. But it was kind of fun because Sean Connery was just engaging. He wrote the script. That's Roald Dahl. He wrote the script for You Only Live Twice, and Ian Fleming was his friend. Roald Dahl was very tall, at least 6'5", and he'd been a pilot. I think he sustained injuries from he crashed his plane, and he was posted. He was based in Washington D.C. Right. His job. He worked for British intelligence. He was a diplomat. He was undercover. His job was to sleep with wealthy American women, right, in Washington D.C. and get inside information, right. So that was what he did. You can imagine your job. So that was like a real James Bond. His job was to sleep with wealthy American women, and then he convey information to British intelligence. Uh, yeah. So that's Roald Dahl. Who else? Who else was famous? So there've been many. Of course, there's Graham Greene. Green wrote our man in Havana, Graham Greene. Graham Greene, interestingly, yeah, he I think he went to Oxford. He graduated from Oxford. He came from an upper middle class family, and he was a journalist. He was a journalist, just like Frederick Forsyth, right? And it's interesting. I've been saying I'm going to do a video discussing the interesting article by Bernstein, right? Carl Bernstein, one of the heroes of the Watergate, right? The one half of the Watergate heroes, um, and he wrote of the relationship between the media, that's journalists, and the CIA, how the CIA has used journalists as cover, and you can see from these British spies like Graham Greene, who was a journalist, um, and these writers, Frederick Forsyth, why it's easy because they travel a lot, right? They travel a lot, um, and so Graham Greene, interestingly, last month was Mental Health Awareness Month. I probably should have done this because he struggled with manic depression, which is bipolar disorder, right? And he was very prolific. He wrote for over 60 years, about 67 years. That's Graham Greene, um, and yeah. So yeah, I guess it's interesting. Writing has always been very very interesting to me. I love reading, and interestingly, I grew up reading a lot of spy novels by Robert Ludlum, right? Robert Ludlum, of course, he's American. He was not a spy, but he wrote so convincingly. Robert Ludlum, of course, is the author of the was the author of the Bourne series, right? We all know Bourne Identity, Bourne Ultimatum, Bourne Supremacy. I read them all when I was a kid. I read virtually. He wrote a ton. Like after he died, people started. I think just like James Bond, other authors started writing because it was a big franchise. But I think the actual novels he wrote, I think I probably read them all. Matarese Circle, Gemini Contenders, Aquitaine Progression. The thing about Robert Ludlum was that it was so interesting that once you picked up his book, um, I couldn't drop his book until I was done. Right, I couldn't drop his novels until I was done, and he wrote so convincingly. And it was interesting to find out he never worked in intelligence, right? Never been a spy, never worked in intelligence. But his writing was so convincing as a result of rigorous research. He did a ton of research on his writing. And apparently, he had roommates who were CIA and MI6 who were in intelligence. So he got a lot of information from them. A very rigorous, very convincing writer. He was fantastic. And once you just start writing, once you start reading him, it's hard to put him down. So I can imagine that they're already crafting a nice novel. The writers are watching David J. Rush very carefully because there's going to be a great novel about him, and Hollywood is preparing for that author who's going to be able to um, unravel and then remake, curate his life in a way that will, be entertaining. So tomorrow he's going to be arraigned at the that's what's tomorrow. Tomorrow is at the Alexandria Courthouse in Virginia. That's U.S. District Court of the Eastern District of Virginia. When you hear U.S. District Court, that's federal, right? That's federal, so not state, even though it's in Virginia. So the Supreme Court and the district courts under, and the hierarchy of the Supreme Court, they have locations, right, in every state in America. In any event, let me stop this video here. I enjoyed discussing authors. Let's see, is there anyone I left out? Of course, there have been so many, but anyway, if I think of somebody else, I will do another video. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.